Hello everyone, welcome to SSW TV studio here at NDC Sydney. I'm here with Chris.
Hi, nice to meet you. So I'm a software engineer at Microsoft, where I work on the Roslyn compiler, the C# compiler. And for the last couple of years, I've been working mainly on the source generator effort.
Yeah, I've seen your talk and there's a lot of amazing stuff. And we have done one interview where we talked about how you can use and how it's going to impact your projects with the source generators. But another good topic would be, what if I want to build a source generator?
Yep.
How do you get started?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, source generators are just like projects at the end of the day. Ultimately, they're just a DLL, an assembly, and they have a special interface that you implement. And then when you pass that assembly to the compiler, it can go and load it. So you essentially just make a project, you add the references to Roslyn, so Microsoft Code Analysis, and then there's just this interface you implement called incremental generator. And that just has a single method called initialize. And it's there that you essentially build up all that information about how you want the compiler to run your code and what code you want to generate. And you just have to stick a little attribute on that called generator so that it knows to go find it. And then when you actually run a project that you want your generator to run under, you just pass that via the analyzer switch. So it's the same command line switch. So if you use it through NuGet, you just put them in the analyzers folder. They will just work when that user adds that NuGet project to their folder, or you can project reference them as you would the same with an analyzer.
So that's quite interesting that you mentioned command line, because what I imagine is you might not want to run some of the analyzers directly in Visual Studio, but you might want to actually run them as part of your pipeline.
Yeah, so I mean, analyzers, that works very well because obviously that they can add diagnostics, but they're not going to change the source code. Whereas with generators, you really have to run them always because something in the user code could be pointing to something in generated code, right? You might have some property that the generator's implemented for you, and you are referencing it. And so if you don't run the generator, that code doesn't compile, right? That code is broken because you've only got 2/3 of the program actually there. And so that's where generators have to run always. And that's actually one of the reasons why we've made the incremental generator framework. Because, source generators were great, but they had some perf issues in the IDE, and we have to run them. It's not an option to disable, and you can't just say, oh, I don't want to do this, because the code may not even compile. And so that's why incremental generators are there. So they're very fast, so that they can always run and they will always be part of your build.
Yeah, and for instance, if there's a company that they might have already a source generator based on the old interface, and they want to move to new one, but they want still to support the old.
Yeah,
they just have both interfaces.
Yeah, and you can absolutely. I mean, you can ship both an iSource generator and an incremental generator in the same assembly. They will both load actually, and so you need to make sure that one isn't running over the other. What we do support is NuGet has support for multi-targeting analyzers and generators now, and so in the same way that you can like multi-target frameworks in your NuGet packages, you can actually multi-target the Roslyn version you want to run. And so inside the analyzer folder, you can just make another folder called like Roslyn 4.3 or Roslyn 4.1, and it will select the highest version that it's compatible with. And so if you're like using some new APIs, for instance, you can ship those so that the people with a newer compiler will get those APIs and they'll run, but it will still load the older generator for those customers who haven't yet upgraded. So yeah, we do support that. The authoring experience is still a little manual. You have to do that yourself. It's not something that's supported out of the box, but it's the consumption side is supported. So, and it's something we're looking at making better as well on the actual build side, so that you can just tell have a NuGet project that has 2 generators and it just automatically puts them in the right place.
Yeah, as a consultant, I see a lot of people moving to 2022. So for most, it's not a problem, but you always get a client where it's like they want to use 2019 for various reasons, and it's good to have that option.
Yeah, absolutely. And I said, again, even going forward as we introduce new APIs, and you can make things faster or do the generation better, but you still want to support your older customers, and so that's where multi-targeting really is very useful.
Yeah, and another thing that I'm thinking about is I've done some analyzers quite a long time ago, and seen a little bit of source generation. I saw your talk, but still think that might be a little bit involving doing it. Are there any plans where you could maybe be able to just say, hey, I want to just do this little thing?
Yeah, and that, today, that's definitely true. Like, really all the tooling, everything is geared towards shipping a source generator in a NuGet package for consumption. But increasingly what we're seeing is that people want to just write a generator against their very specific project, right? They don't want to share this thing out. They just want to say, hey, I've got some boilerplate that I don't want to write. And so today that's quite an involved process where you have to have this project and you have to set it up this way. And so, I mean, I got no concrete plans, but something we've been looking at is, could you imagine just having a file in your project and say, this is my generation code? And then, just actually tie it all in together. And then when you build, it first builds that and builds the generator, and then that generator gets loaded and runs. And then, there are some interesting problems to solve around that, but it's certainly something I think that we're interested in exploring and interested in seeing what that looks like. And I think that will really open up source generators to a lot of people if you can get rid of all that ceremony in order to write, when you can just fairly quickly go in and say, yeah, I want to just do some boilerplate for this project. So.
Yeah, in a lot of cases right now, we either use IntelliCode or GitHub Copilot to deal with the boilerplate because it's so much of it, and it's not really a good way of solving it, but this could actually solve the problem.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and you also shown you can write unit tests for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a unit testing framework that we have in the Roslyn SDK, which you can get on GitHub. And that was originally designed for analyzers, but we've extended it to work for generators. And so I highly recommend that, like, trying to test these things. It's like, ultimately, it's like a very complicated thing, right? You're writing a component that sits in a compiler that compiles code. Like, they're not easy to test. And so the framework just sets a lot of that up. So you can essentially say, hey, given a project which has these NuGet packages and this source code, go run the generator and check that the files that came out look like this. So that's pretty nice. And we introduced some new APIs as well into the actual generator driver. So if you want to do a bit more in-depth testing, you can actually, inside your code, you can essentially tag parts of the execution pipeline with a name. And then in your unit test, you can go back and assert, based on those names, whether they ran or not, like why they ran, what changed. So if you want to actually write unit tests for your incrementalism, you can do that. You can say, given a project, if I change this additional file, go run my generators and then check that only the small part that needed to run actually ran. So you can ensure that you're not accidentally running more code than you need to.
Oh yeah, that reminds me how sometimes we test if safe changes, for instance, happened without actually executing safe changes. We just look at if the method was called.
Yeah, and so these APIs kind of give you access to the internals of the generator driver in the compiler, and so you can actually go in and dig in and see exactly why things are happening on a pretty granular level if you want to go that far.
Yeah, and what I also seen is the F5 experience is now much better.
Yes, so absolutely. So I mean, originally when we were when we first started generators, it was very unpleasant. The sort of pseudo-official guideline was debugger.launch, right, or debugger.break. There was no really great way of debugging these things, and so now we have this thing called the Roslyn Component Debugger. Which is, if you have the Roslyn SDK installed, is in your Visual Studio. And what you can do is you can just tag your project. In the project file, you just say, is Roslyn component true? And what that will do in the launch profiles window is give you a new option of a debug target, which is the Roslyn component. And that allows you to select another project that you want to actually debug compiling. So what you end up doing is you essentially end up debugging your generator running on the code in that other project. And so that means you can literally just F5, you can write some code in the project, F5, and go through and debug your generator easily. So it's quite an advance from where we started. We're really in a much better place.
Yeah, and to be clear, so back in the days, you have to have two Visual Studio. One is in a special mode.
Yeah, and because generators, like for analyzers, that worked because analyzers can be loaded from the Visual Studio instance, right? They don't have to be part of the project, but that's not true for generators. So it was very complicated to actually even just set it up to do that for generators. So this really just closes the dev loop down to just a very quick F5 and you're there. You just stick a breakpoint, hit F5, and there you are in your method, and you can start debugging as you want.
So it's going to be just in one Visual Studio?
Yeah, absolutely. So it actually what you're debugging is the Roslyn compiler, right? When you actually hit F5, what actually launches, and you'll see it says, Microsoft C# compiler, and that's what you're actually attached to. But your generator is running in there, and so you can then actually just hit breakpoints and everything just works as you'd expect.
Yeah, I've been from early stages keeping track, then I lost a little bit in last few years, and the progress is amazing.
Yeah, well, I mean, hopefully it'll just keep going,
Thanks for all of that. I think it's going to be very, very good future with all of the source generators. I'm very excited for it.
I hope so.
And with that, from SSW TV, signing off. Have a nice day.